Good afternoon. I'm Roy Engle, and I have the pleasure of serving as Vice President of Student Affairs at Ball State University. Inclusive excellence is an enduring value at our university, a value that guides our ability to fulfill our vital mission. In our strategic plan, we define inclusiveness as a commitment to respect and embrace equity, inclusion, and diversity in people, ideas, and opinions. Throughout our history, we've embraced this enduring value by nurturing a diverse and inclusive living, learning, and working environment for all members of our campus community. In our first Inclusive Excellence Roundtable, our President, Jeff Mearns, led a discussion with a few of our alumni leaders, as well as our Associate Vice President for Inclusive Excellence. Our second Inclusive Excellence Roundtable, led by Susana Rivera-Mills, our Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs, focused on those leading the way amongst our faculty and staff. So today, I've asked a few of our student leaders at Ball State to join me for the third in a four-part roundtable series to discuss our past, present, and future in the terms of this very important work. Let me begin with a few brief introductions. So Jordan Blythe is a junior double majoring in communication studies and political science, as well as a member of the Honors College. She is the Vice President for the Student Government Association and a founding member of the Student Anti-Racism and Intersectionality Advisory Council, where she works to empower students to cultivate an understanding of race and dismantle racist ideologies. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you.
And Richard Bowman is a senior majoring in construction management, a nationally ranked speaker on the high school and collegiate levels, a published poet, and spoken word artist from Indianapolis. Richard is a former member of the Ball State University speech team and the Associated Schools of Construction Design Build team. He also helped establish a youth program in partnership with the Office of Inclusive Excellence and the Connection Corner within the Muncie Public Library System. Welcome, Richard. Nice to have you.
Glad to be here.
And then Evan Morales is a third-year undergrad student at the College of Fine Arts, where he began his studies as a BA Theater Creations major before successfully auditioning for the BFA in Musical Theater program. Evan works as a peer advocate leader at the Ball State Multicultural Center, hosting workshops and presentations about social justice and inclusiveness to different groups on campus. Welcome, Evan. Nice to have you. And Michaela Yeo is a first-year graduate student in Student Affairs Administration in Higher Education program, serving as a graduate assistant for diversity and equity initiatives in the Office of Student Life. Michaela primarily works as an advisor for the Latinx Student Union and Spectrum, the LGBT+ focused undergraduate student organization. Michaela earned a Bachelor degree of Arts here at Ball State, as well, where they developed their passion for working with minoritized student populations to ensure success during their undergraduate career and post-graduation. Welcome, Michaela. Nice to have you. So, here we are. So I wanted to start off today's conversation with getting to know our panelists and their journeys to Ball State. So I will start with you, Jordan. Ball State really wasn't on your radar at all until very late in the process in high school. But I understand that as a result of a visit and a conversation with our Dean of the Honors College, Dean Emmert, he really sold you on our university. What was it about Ball State that ultimately stood out for you?
Yeah, so Ball State wasn't on my radar. I got one of those like you're a priority applicant emails in the email, and it was free, and there was no essay I had to write. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna fill that out. And so after doing that, I was able to come to a visit on Honors Preview Day, and I got to sit in on an honors class, and they were describing Chinese landscape paintings, but using musical terminology. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. This is so dope, right? But also on that visit, there were probably 100 prospective students there, and I was the only Black person in the room. Like of the prospective students, and including honor students who came for like the panel discussion, there were really no students of color there. I think there was like one Asian student, and that was it. And so I loved everything about the campus and about the honors college, but I was looking at going to Howard, so it was really a stark dichotomy there, and that was something I was looking for, that community. And so my dad actually spoke to Dean Emmert, and Dean Emmert was really forthcoming about it. He was like, I know this is a huge issue, this is a problem, and we're taking steps to rectify it, but we also need people like your daughter on campus who also encourage others to come. So that conversation, my dad relaying that to me was really it, because he was so forthcoming and open about what he saw as the problem. It made me really believe that, the rest of the campus had that sort of mentality and ideology, and I would be happy to be in a place like that. So, of course, there's still strides that need to be made, right? The work always continues, but I'm really, really proud, especially of my peers in the Honors College, who have definitely taken up that mantle, and appreciative to administration and faculty for really listening to those concerns.
Absolutely. I know Dean Emmett for a long while, and that sounds very much like him. So we're so glad you decided to make that decision. So Evan, so you auditioned for a number of musical theater schools coming out of high school, but it was a feeling of inclusion that led you to choose Ball State. How did our university catch your eye in that regard?
Yeah, so similar to interviews, they say when you're auditioning for schools or auditioning for anything, you're also auditioning the people behind the table. And after going through about 7 or 8 auditions, I got different energies from each one. And with Ball State, that was the most people I saw in the audition room at one time. And at first that was a little scary, obviously, but I did end up getting more comfortable as the audition went on. And I thought this is more of a community than it is, just people auditioning you. And I saw students, I saw faculty, I saw voice teachers, all sorts of different people, and all of them had obvious different backgrounds. It was a very diverse room, and so that's what really kind of caught my eye at first. And I remember leaving that audition being like, that was really fun, and I don't remember how I did. I don't remember if I was successful, but that was just really fun. And that was the point in which I said, yeah, I'm gonna go with this school, even though I didn't necessarily make it that first round for the BFA. I said, I think this is the school that's gonna give me the best second chance.
Absolutely, you found your community. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Richard, you actually started your college experience elsewhere, coming out of Ben Davis High School in Indianapolis, but eventually you found a home here at Ball State. What is it about Ball State that drew you in as a transfer student?
Well, actually, it was a Ball State alumni who directed me towards Ball State by the name of Dr. Paul Porter. He's an alumni of not just Ball State, but also Ben Davis High School. So, he was a great mentor of mine and still is to this day. So when I was looking for places closer to home, he was like, you know what? I know you, we're very similar. You gotta visit Ball State. You gotta talk to the coaches, you gotta be there. And I mean, after coming here, talking to the speech coaches and just getting a feel for the environment, I don't know, just felt like this was the place that I should be. Seemed like the right fit for me.
Absolutely. I know Paul Porter very well, so very nice. And Michaela, I understand that it was an interest in photojournalism that landed you at Ball State at a young age. You eventually moved to Indiana, which I am sure made that college decision even easier. But take us through your decision to attend Ball State for your undergrad and then now as a graduate student.
Yeah, so I had a passion for photojournalism from a really young age, and I got on the computer and Googled just schools that I could get a photojournalism degree, and Ball State popped up as one of the top options. I was out of state at the time, so then whenever I moved to Indiana, I was like, okay, great, in-state tuition. And Indiana high schools can participate in something called Journalism Day or J-Day, and so I was fortunate enough to every April come up to campus and see the passion that the journalism department professors had for teaching students and making sure that students are building successful pieces of their lives to be able to get out into the world and do great things with their journalism degree. And so then whenever I got to Ball State, I still had that passion, but then it was in other areas as well. It was within orientation, and it was within fraternity and sorority life. It was in a lot of places where people were emulating that for just student development. And that's where I kind of picked up the student affairs bug, and I was like, all right, we're gonna go to grad school. And whenever I was searching for places, I met Dr. Phelps Ward, and her passion for bringing equity and social justice into the curriculum of student affairs administration was phenomenal. It was something that spoke to my heart and to my passion areas. So I was able to kind of combine my purpose and my passion in life and come back to Ball State, be a Cardinal again, and complete my second degree.
Well, excellent. We're happy to have you. And it is really interesting to have that social justice aspect to a student affairs curriculum, so very important. So thank you, Michaela. So I wanted to turn our focus on some of your own personal experiences when it comes to inclusivity and diversity, both growing up and here at Ball State. So Jordan, I'll start with you again. Because we've talked about inclusivity and diversity on our campus, but to you there is a clear difference between those two words. So how would you describe that difference between inclusivity and diversity, and why are those ideals important to you?
I think it's so important to internalize what the difference is, because if you don't get it, you're not fighting for the right things, if that makes sense. So to me, inclusion is like finding community, right? It's making people feel safe, making people feel like this community that they're in can really be a home. Diversity is cool, right? It's cool to have people who look like you, who come from similar backgrounds as you, who you can relate with on that regard. But if you have all these people who then hate it in the community, like there's no point. So if there's no making people feel safe, if there's no making people feel like they are heard, like they're valued, then you might as well not have all of those identities present, because you're not appreciating those identities. It's just a waste. And so that's why it's always really important to me to understand the difference, because I mean, in my own life, I've had to experience people not getting the difference, you know, wanting to put me on a pamphlet somewhere or have me speak X, Y, and Z places to show that we really care, but then their policies are not backing it up. And so I really appreciate Ball State for, you know, taking the time to actually try to make policies that do back it up, whereas other institutions, my high school, like was not really like that at all. But I really think just internalizing this idea of community, of safety, of belonging. I think, yeah, that's what really comes down to. Belonging is important.
That is such a keen difference between just the presence of diversity as opposed to people's sense of community and seeing themselves as part of that community. So thank you for sharing that. So Richard, even as someone taking accelerated AP honors courses in high school and excelling at the state level in speech competitions, you've noted experiences in which you have felt uneasy or uncomfortable as a person of color in academic settings. What were those feelings like for you, and what kind of impact did that have on you?
Well, if I could put those feelings into words, I would say it was first a feeling of shock, anger, disgust, and then disappointment in that exact order, you know? Ultimately ending in disappointment because for the most part, there was always that illusion of inclusivity. You know, there was always that illusion, the talk. They talked the talk, they talked a great game about it, but on the back end, when it really mattered, I was left out to dry so many times. And, you know, that hurts. You know, it was a very deep cut, and one that I felt many times before in many different settings, but it's something that I like to give the benefit of the doubt a lot of the times. I really do. And, you know, when that disappointment does come, it's just kind of like, well, all right, let's change that. Never again. If it happens to me again, I can understand, but it's not going to happen to the next kid, and the next kid, and the next kid, if I have anything to do with it.
So it's using your own pain and your experience to make a change in its space. Thank you. So Michaela, you've mentioned the culture shock you felt moving from Pennsylvania to Indiana. Can you describe what that was like and how that sparked an interest in helping students with diverse and underrepresented backgrounds?
Yeah, so whenever I lived in Pennsylvania, I lived in like an intersection of a lot of different cultures, especially with an Army War College by. We had people from international areas coming and staying in the area that I grew up in. And so I had grown up on the wrong side of the tracks. My family was low income. And so I was around people of color my entire childhood. And then I moved to South Central Indiana. And that was a shock in and of itself because I was like, okay, everybody looks like me, but like, where are all of the people of color? And so then I realized that there was kind of this deep-seated racism within South Central Indiana. And I had to really kind of reevaluate what it meant to be a white person because I had never had to kind of come in contact with that specifically. And so I had all of these things going on, but then on top of that, I also had to confront some of my own biases because the East Coast is significantly more ableist. And so I was able to really confront those pieces of myself as well and learn from people in South Central Indiana. So it's uncomfortable, right? Confronting biases, confronting privilege is always uncomfortable, but you can either hit a wall and decide I'm not gonna do that internal work, or you can move past that wall and then start to really help change what is causing that to happen in the first place. And so that's what kind of pushed me into a diversity, equity, and inclusion space in general. Coming to terms with my own sexuality did that as well. And so kind of just moving through that throughout high school is an interesting time in and of itself. But being able to kind of do a lot of that internal work prior to coming to Ball State was really helpful for me to then be able to make an impact as a student.
Absolutely. Thank you for, it's always good to be able to use that personal experience to be able to empathize, relate, and then inform what you do. Such great work going into student affairs that you'll be using. So Evan, what are some of the challenges that you have faced as a Mexican-American musical theater student, and how have you tried to overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up and, you know, starting to find my, my niche in theater, I didn't necessarily see a lot of my community as a Mexican-American represented in musical theater, in shows or in roles, or even in creative teams and technical teams. I didn't really see that as much, at least, you know, seeing shows in my community or going to see professional shows or even seeing high school shows. And that was something that I felt like was missing almost my time before college. And that was something I've always wanted to fill. I said, I really want to see more representation, more people playing these roles, and more people telling these stories that are so important and could have such an interesting perspective from someone who is Mexican American. And so that was something that really stuck with me going into college, and that was something I said, I really want to see more of that and explore more of that, that interest I have. So when I got here, one challenge that I was really facing was typecast, and seeing that, you know, as Mexican American, I would only be put in Mexican roles or in minority roles, and that wasn't something that I necessarily wanted to do. I do think those stories are important to tell a lot of times, but there are also roles that I think could be racially ambiguous, can be really impactful from a different perspective as a minority that don't necessarily have to focus on that part of myself. So that was one challenge that I've been trying to face throughout college, and I think that Ball State has done a really good job at melding that dichotomy between these are the stories that should be told, for people who are of color, people who are minorities, and here are some racially ambiguous shows that tell other stories that can be put into different perspectives. And I think that's something that Ball State does really well.
Thank you, Evan. So I'm going to pivot our conversation to some of the effects and observations we have made here as students when it comes to inclusive excellence at Ball State. So Richard, I'm going to start with you. Speech and written word have made a huge impact on your life. And now you're working with the Office of Inclusive Excellence to establish a youth program within the Muncie Public Library System, the Flowetry Academy. What is the basis of your program and what do you hope it is used for?
Well, just kind of the way you put it, speech has been an extremely important part of my life. I've been in it for years. I even coach now too. And the idea from it actually came from my experience when I first joined my high school speech team. I was putting together my first poetry program, looking at different poets and just material that's out there until I came across one poem by a poet named Stephen Willis called Ebonics 101. Phenomenal poem if you ever get a chance to listen to it. And when I first saw it, my very first thought was, black people do this? This is allowed? It was so eye-opening for me because the only type of poetry I'd really been exposed to was on the written page, was Frost and Shakespeare, and these are great writers, but I didn't really get to understand what poetry could be until I saw that. And that's where the Flowetry Academy came from, was that feeling of, I can do this. This is something that is available to me. This is something that I can be a part of, because I'd always written poetry and I'd loved it. And so Flowetry Academy came out of me wanting to give that feeling to other kids, to other students. Because I was like, there's so many students that know about poetry and they only see it as one thing. But if they saw what the spoken word community looked like, how accepting it is, how open, how inclusive, how free it is to be able to write the way you want and tell the stories you want, I feel like it would just go so far for students and just kids in general to be able to express themselves in that way. And so I wanted to present the opportunity for kids to do that and show them, hey, this is available to you too. There's more than one way to write poetry. There's more than one way to express yourself on the page. And that's really where it stemmed from. It's something that I've wanted to do for quite some time, but hadn't quite connected with the right people yet to really get it started and get all the movers and shakers in place. But I ran into Paris McCurdy in the Office of Inclusive Excellence, and we just sat down for a conversation. He was like, hey, I'm working on ideas for how to better connect Ball State with the greater Muncie community. If you have any ideas. And I was like, well, it just so happens that I do. I've got one. And we just hit the ground running. He helped me put together my proposal, put me in contact with Connection Corner at the Muncie Library, and we just ran with it, And when we first started off, it was mostly just, for students, elementary through high school. But as we started going, I started having more conversations with them, and they were like, we've got some more adults and everyone that are really interested in this. Can we bring them in? And I'm like, well, yeah, this knowledge is for everybody. Go ahead. If they want to join the space, come on in. And, just every single time, hey, we got some more people that want to be. It's like, come on in, join us, get in on this experience. And so kind of my hope with it is just this year with COVID, we didn't really get to do all the things that we wanted to do with it. We had to get creative in the spaces we used, and especially with technology, but we laid the foundation. And it's going to be a permanent part of the Muncie Library now, so it is theirs and they are going to keep it going, and I'm very proud of that. Because ultimately my goal isn't for it to just be my program. It's a Muncie Library program. I want to take it to other places. I want to take it to my city, Indy, and make it a part of an organization there and be like, hey, this is your Flowetry Academy. Take it to other cities. This is your Flowetry Academy. and then ultimately lead up to hopefully starting my own nonprofit that would help fund these programs in different cities and start new ones all over. Because, you know, I know for a fact there's so many kids all over who have yet to discover this world, and I would love to be there to help them on their journey.
Absolutely. I believe in you. Now I'm excited about it. So, yeah, absolutely. Good. Thank you, Richard. So, Michaela, in your role as the advisor of Spectrum, which is Ball State's LGBTQ plus organization, you've noted many challenges currently facing our transgender population here on campus, and you spoke earlier about your project that you're working on for the Multicultural Center. And as you've noted, some of those challenges can start at home. What are the hurdles that remain in this area, and how can we help start the process of making transgender students feel safer and more comfortable at Ball State University?
It's a big topic, and there's a lot of work to be done. Trans students in particular are one of our most at risk for basic needs and security. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, that was kind of exacerbated. We saw just this massive increase in the use of Cardinal Kitchen by our trans students. We saw a massive increase in the need to ask for grant funding to help cover rent and find places to live if they didn't already have a place. And so expanding basic needs resources on campus is something that's going to help out our trans students immensely, but it's also a matter of making students feel comfortable. We talked about it earlier with inclusion versus diversity. We can say that we have trans students on campus, but are professors using the proper pronouns in class? Are they using the student's name, not their chosen name, but their name? It's little things like that that seem like they're not a big deal, but it is somebody's entire world in existence, and it needs to be respected and cared for, which is why I'm working on the Lavender Door to create a free clothing resource on campus for trans and gender nonconforming individuals to be able to have a space where they can get gender affirming clothing without having to worry about the cost, because it's expensive to revamp your entire wardrobe. And then you don't have to worry about the judgment of going into a store, and if you aren't passing, you are in the wrong section, and that's a dangerous situation for somebody to be in potentially. So making things safe, making people feel welcome, included, and wanted is the biggest thing there.
And wanted is such a key phrase in that. Everybody wants to feel like they're wanted in some perspective. Thank you, Michaela, for that. And Evan, you serve as a peer advocate leader at the Multicultural Center, hosting workshops and presentations on social justice and inclusiveness to various groups on campus. When it comes to racial discrimination and injustice, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement, what effect have you noticed on your various interactions across campus?
Absolutely. One thing that I always say is that there's a lot of talking in the world and not enough listening. And I think that the workshops and presentations that we do at the Multicultural Center do just that, and it's make people listen to other perspectives and just take in as much information as possible. I always start off my workshops with saying that this is not a debate in any way. And I never want to make it a debate. I always want to make it a conversation and more of a discussion than anything else. And by doing that, I've noticed a lot more students are willing to open up to new perspectives. They ask more questions rather than putting out, their own bias on certain topics. And I think that's been really effective, especially this year after everything that was going on this summer. It made people stop and think for a second before they put out their own bias, like I mentioned, and just ask questions and have questions answered by not only me, but by the other people in the workshop. And I think that's been really effective, especially coming out of last summer. Absolutely.
I always talk about seeking to understand rather than be understood is a great way to have some of those conversations. So Jordan, like all of our panelists here today, You've made it a point to take part in a number of different student activities on campus, which we spoke about in your introduction. So whether it's SGA, the speech team, your sorority, or any other group or activity, what has been your approach in terms of encouraging inclusivity?
Yeah, I think there are a few different things that I do, but the very first is figuring out who I'm speaking with, because students in SGA will have a different understanding than students on the speech team, than students in Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, than students on SAIAC. So people are coming from a whole bunch of different backgrounds with a whole bunch of different knowledge bases. So when you're getting ready to call people in, as Dr. Rutter would say, we don't call people out, we call people into the conversation. Being aware of where they're coming from is really helpful. I think that another key thing is just whenever I can, advocating for students who are from historically marginalized populations or underrepresented populations, while also acknowledging, like what Michaela was saying earlier, my own biases and like gaps I have in my own understanding. Because, I can speak to the experience of being a Black woman, but when it comes to representing our Latinx students, our LGBTQ plus students, our Native American students, there's definitely learning that I have to do. So being ready to confront that and do that research so I can be the best advocate for them as possible. And then finally, doing my best to encourage people who are feeling pushed to the margins or who are being pushed to the margins to speak up, and then to encourage those who are doing the pushing to not get defensive, because it's so hard to unlearn, right? Like, this has been indoctrinated in us since we were children. So it's really, really hard sometimes to unlearn these sort of habits that we engage in. So encouraging people to not get too frustrated with themselves or with the conversation, to just take a step back first, really try to understand what people are saying. It's not a debate, right? All those sorts of things I think come together for really productive conversations about inclusivity in these different groups.
Absolutely. I talk a lot sometime about keep talking. Is when you stop talking is when it becomes dangerous and unproductive. So thank you, Jordan. So for this final portion of our roundtable, I want to focus more on the big picture and the future of our great university, Ball State's inclusive excellence efforts. So Richard, we'll start with you this time. Because you've said you've hoped to eliminate a feeling that there are pockets of inclusivity at Ball State. So moving forward, what are some ways in which we can all help to achieve that feeling of inclusivity for all?
This is something, that I've thought about a lot, and the idea that it always comes back to for me is just creating those moments of community. And that's something that I feel like just in my time I've missed a little bit. I found my homes, I found my people, my chosen family. But, as a whole, when it comes to just like my community on campus, I feel like I kind of miss out on that sometimes. And having those moments of community, whether it just be, just kick back and hang and everything like that. I mean, one moment from just my freshman year that I will never forget. I learned about every multicultural student organization on one day. It wasn't orientation, it wasn't walkthroughs, it was at a barbecue. They just hosted a barbecue. They had tables. There was dominoes, checkers, all these random games. I got to meet the vice presidents and presidents of just the multicultural center and the different offices. I got to meet the presidents and vice presidents of the Greek life of every student organization. They were just there, ready to talk to you, just hang out. And that was how I got to know everybody and understand where I was, who I was around, the resources that were presented to me, because it wasn't, just a flyer that I saw in passing. It wasn't an email blast. It was, hey, we're having this event. Why don't you just come on down, have some good food, get beaten in dominoes, and, just get to know what you have access to here. And I feel like that can be lacking at times. We just need those moments where it's not a teaching moment, but a community moment, a family moment, a moment that just brings us together to have a good time. I mean, a lot of times when it comes to breaking down those barriers of, creating inclusivity, it can be because you don't know, you don't understand. There's that there's that barrier in place. I don't know this person. I'm not sure if I'm accepted here. But when you create those events and those spaces where people are just like, hey, it's good to meet you. Hi, this is who I am. It inherently creates that inclusive moment. It inherently brings you into that community. And I feel like more moments of that on campus, more times, more opportunities can really take us a long way.
Absolutely. Thank you. So important, because that's a long-standing event at Ball State, and all the reasons you spoke about are the reasons it continues to be successful, just being able to do that. So thank you. So Evan, over to you. What role does Ball State play in trying to help improve inclusivity efforts, not only on our campus, but in the greater Muncie community?
Tying it back to what Michaela was saying, we hold this responsibility to better the stigma that comes with being in like the central Indiana area, and this idea that, you know, it's very different than an East Coast city than it is Chicago, anywhere else. And we hold this responsibility to give outreach to Muncie, the Delaware County area. I think one great example is how theater education students go out to Muncie Civic Theater and Burris Laboratory Schools to direct shows, to put on different workshops for the children, and to just give them some outreach for arts. I'm a big advocate for arts outreach, and I think that's one way that Muncie or Ball State can interact with the Muncie community as a whole. And another thing that the Multicultural Center is planning on doing is giving more outreach programs for Muncie as well. We're looking to collaborate with some small businesses. We're looking to put on some workshops through said small businesses, as well as through just our own, by our own doing. And we hope that that's going to make an overall difference in the community that we live in, because we're not only students, but we're also Muncie residents as well. And we want to make this community as inclusive as possible.
Thank you, Evan. So Michaela, as we continue this important work with our Inclusive Excellence Plan at Ball State, moving forward, in your mind, how important is it for the university to grasp the balance between being proactive in some situations and being reactive in other situations?
Oh man. All right. So this is something that we talk about a lot in the Student Affairs program, especially whenever Dr. Phelps Ward came in. I feel like every class got kind of a twist to it of like, okay, but let's take this a little bit deeper. How do we bring social justice education into these concepts? And I think that's something that's so incredibly important and great for all student affairs, administrators, professionals, as well as faculty to take into account, because to be proactive, you have to have support from the top down and then from the bottom up. So that means setting a standard of, from the top, this is my expectation of everyone. Inclusive excellence doesn't come out of one office. It comes out of every office, or it doesn't work. And so you have to be able to kind of spread this concept out. And then on top of that, you also have to have buy-in from your students. They have to know that this is something that Ball State cares about. This is something that Ball State takes seriously. And so if I want to be a student here and be part of this community, I need to take this seriously for myself and for others as well. So we have all of those pieces of it. And sometimes it's hard to be proactive, right? I have been at Ball State since 2016. And so I have been amidst the Trump era and now post-Trump era as well. And so sometimes it's hard to stay on top of stuff. Social media kind of takes something and it runs. And so you can't be proactive about every situation. But if you help to work to dismantle the systems that are marginalizing students, are pushing them to those outer margins and not making them feel included and accepted at the university, that's how you can be proactive at the end of the day, because we're a PWI, or a predominantly white institution. So there's a lot of decolonization that has to happen and dismantling of systemic oppression within that we can help, that we currently uphold, that we can help kind of dismantle to make the world better at the end of the day, because we're not reproducing society, we're bettering society in higher education, or at least that's what we should be aiming to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was definitely coming from a lens of a student affairs professional, but going into higher education, it certainly is. You gave us a lot to think about there with that. So thank you, Michaela. And finally, Jordan, you've had a unique perspective as a student who gets the opportunity at times to kind of peel back that curtain and see what is behind there with the university's Inclusive Excellence Plan and how that works. So how enlightening has that opportunity been for you? And what are some ways that the university could continue to improve its outreach efforts to students when it comes to inclusive excellence?
Yeah, I got my notes on this one. I don't want to miss nothing. But I think definitely if there is a way we can just let more students behind the curtain whenever possible, that would really be it. I echo everything Michaela just said about being proactive versus reactive, because a lot of the concerns I hear from students is that, oh, we're always moving faster than the university. Oh, we're always speaking out first. Oh, they don't actually care. But knowing after meetings with you and Dr. McGriff, everything that's been going on behind the scenes, like I understand why y'all don't want to put that out there because it's not finished yet, right? You don't want to push out a finished product. But if there is a way to, little quarterly updates or something that'll let students just know a little bit better what exactly is going on, because if they don't see it, they just think they've been abandoned, essentially. And I understand where that feeling comes from. I definitely think that's valid. So if there's a way to just affirm students and let them know that we are moving on your behalf, we are doing things for you. We can't let you know all the pieces quite yet, but here's a little sneak peek at it. I think that's a great way to move forward. And then another really, really big piece in terms of moving forward with all of this is encouraging administrators, faculty, staff to step in more when it comes to having these sort of tough conversations about inclusion. Because honestly, most of the burden of that falls on students in day-to-day life. I see it within the honors college, within fraternity and sorority life, in just about every facet that I participate in. It's students are really the ones who are taking up the mantle. And it's exhausting. And we're not getting paid for it. So, it's like compensate students for doing that work, or have more faculty and staff and administrators saying, we're gonna handle this on your behalf, right? Because things are received differently when it's from administrators versus from peers. So I don't mean that to say like students should not engage in that at all, but it should not be the student's responsibility at all times to engage in that sort of work. So just looking ahead, getting more professional engagement in that, I think would really help move things in a productive direction.
And thank you so much for that, Jordan, because having this conversation, it's part of that. Because I think one of the things that's so critical, like you said, is that, and Michaela noted, it starts from top to bottom and bottom to top. So that means students like you doing the work, but administrators and others like us also doing the work and meeting you there. And in that space is where we really move the needle on inclusive excellence and living inclusivity, which we all spoke about is more than just the presence of diversity, but it's how do we make people feel and that sense of belonging. So I so appreciate you. I appreciate the conversation, the work, and the challenge that you as students provide to us to keep going. And yeah, we do have some great stuff, and there's a lot of hope and progress ahead for Ball State. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And thank you to all of today's guests for your time and your input. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for joining us. Be sure to keep an eye out for this roundtable and other endeavors related to inclusive excellence at Ball State amongst the university's multiple channels, including our website, social media, and email. I hope you return for our next roundtable as we continue our conversation about this important, enduring value at our university.